So let's say we're starting to build up our portfolio, whether it's in retirement or in a taxable brokerage. We hear a lot about portfolio diversification. So how can investors keep this diversification choice simple?
Well, that's a really interesting question because for me anyway, because occasionally I recommend only two funds. I recommend VTSAX, which is Vanguard's Total Stock Market Index Fund, and I recommend that when you're in your earning years and you have cash flow coming. That's the only fund I think you need. My daughter's a good example. That's what I've told her. That's the only fund. She's young and working, and every month she's putting money in. So when the market takes one of its periodic expected natural drops like it is now, then she benefits from that drop because she has that cash flow. And some people say, well, what about diversification? I mean, isn't that important? You're only recommending one fund. We have to step back and realize what that one fund is. As we said earlier, with that one fund, you own virtually every publicly traded company in the United States. That's last count somewhere around 3,600 companies. Now, to put that in perspective, because sometimes, people get a little off track, I think, worrying about diversification. When I was young, which is a long, long time ago, and index funds didn't exist, at least initially, the recommendation to have a well-diversified portfolio, typically you were buying individual stocks because that was the most available option. A well-diversified portfolio was defined as owning 7 or 8 industries, right? So picking 7 or 8 sectors, and then picking 1 or 2 companies within those sectors, and that was your portfolio. And that was considered well diversified. Well, that's maybe 15, 16 stocks altogether. But that was a well diversified portfolio. So when people say to me, JL, you only want one fund, you're not diversified enough. I think, I think you kind of don't quite understand what that one fund is and what diversification used to look like.
Thousands of companies instead of 17, right? That makes a lot of sense. Absolutely. Okay, well, let's talk about early retirement, because we poked at it a little bit there. You said 14 to 15 years if you're doing this path right at 50%. How can somebody do that? Can you walk us through that?
How could they do it from what point of view?
Let's say somebody is starting today and they're 30 years old and they said, you know what? I think this is a great idea. I think I can do this in the next 14 to 15 years if I live on 50%. What would be their first step to walk a simple path to financial independence?
Well, I suppose the first step is if they're 30 years old and they haven't had a high savings rate, if they're like most people, they're probably they're probably spending rather most of their income. Maybe, and most Americans live paycheck to paycheck. So maybe if they're really ahead of the curve, they're saving 5 or 10%, and that's not going to get you to early retirement. That's barely going to get you to a retirement at 65 or 70. So the first thing they're going to need to do is look at their expenses and figure out how to organize their life in such a fashion to live on a lot less. That's step number one. And that's a tough step, and I appreciate that. And I think the way you reconcile it is you have to say, well, how important is my financial freedom? Because that's really what you're buying. So I had a conversation with a woman one time a number of years ago who said, this sounds great, but in the family I grew up in, spending money is what we did. And this would just feel like so much deprivation if I stopped spending money the way I am in order to do this. And I said, well, it's just a different way of spending money. It's just instead of going out and buying a new car or a fancier house or remodeling your kitchen, or you're choosing to buy your freedom. And it's not my job or responsibility to tell anybody what to do with their money. It's your money. You can do whatever you want to do with it. What I would suggest is think about how valuable is financial freedom to you. And if you find yourself putting off because that's what you're buying with investing. And if you find yourself putting off setting aside that money and investing it in order to buy the fancier car or to remodel the kitchen or the wardrobe, then clearly financial independence is not that valuable to you. And that's okay. I mean, everybody lives their own life. It's not reasonable to say, I still want to keep buying all those things I've been buying. I still want to keep living the same life I've been living and I want to be financially independent, you're going to have to make some hard choices.